Today I'm going to talk about how to answer the tell me about yourself question that's a staple of medical residency interviews. If you're watching this video, you've probably already experienced most of the challenges that doctors in training face, like getting into medical school and certain parts of the USMLE. At this point, you've even done some or most of your rotations. Now that you've submitted your ERAS application, there's one more box to check before you become a resident doctor: nailing your residency interviews. Clearing those other hurdles will undoubtedly have equipped you with a valuable training in how to handle the stressful and uncertain match process. However, residency interviews are notoriously unpredictable, which can make preparing for them a challenge. Luckily, there are some standard questions that will show up again and again, like tell me about yourself. By preparing an excellent answer in advance, you can set yourself up for interview success. Hi, I'm Dr. Pranjal Gupta, medical school admissions expert from Shamasi Academic Consulting. In this job, I'll help you understand the purpose of the tell me about yourself question and why it's an important aspect of your residency interviews. I'll show you a great example response and explain why it works. Plus, I'll also give you a step-by-step method to create a strong answer of your own. Let's get started. First, let's talk about why residencies interview you in the first place. After all, you've already submitted plenty of materials that should give them a sense of who you are, like your grades, USMLE scores, CV, letters of rec, and more. These materials will go a long way in highlighting your academic accomplishments, but they most likely won't convey certain things that residency committees are also interested in understanding, like your personality and your social skills. That's where interviews come into play. Residency committees use interviews to get a sense of three key attributes. You're personable and it's easy to connect with you. Doctors interact with people all day, every day, whether that's with patients or with fellow medical staff. Being friendly and sociable is a must, which brings us to our next point. You don't exhibit interpersonal difficulties such as social awkwardness or argumentativeness. You should also show that you know how to get along with others and can foster a pleasant atmosphere. No one wants to work with someone who makes them feel uncomfortable or who has a huge ego. You're as polished in person as you seem in your applications. You might be able to edit your essays to perfection, but you'll have a harder time concealing red flags or missteps during an in-person interview. Remember that a key difference between residency interviews and interviews for med school is that committees aren't just hiring a student or an apprentice. They're also hiring a colleague whose personality and professionalism must fit with the existing team. So, given the importance of conveying who you are beyond your stats, the tell me about yourself question is one that you want to get right. Tell me about yourself. You've probably heard this question in every interview you've been in, usually as an opening question. However, it's such an open-ended prompt that many residency applicants are unsure of how to handle this in its context. You might wonder, should you talk about your interest in that residency specialty? Should you go over your clinical experiences and academic accomplishments? You might even suspect that it's a deceptively simple trick question. Rest assured that it's not a trick question, but some responses will be more effective than others. One common misconception is that you need to start the interview by immediately launching into a discussion of all your accomplishments and medical experiences, especially the ones that relate to the specialty you're trying to match into. Some applicants think that by not doing this, they'll run the risk of seeming less enthusiastic or less dedicated than other candidates. This isn't the case. While you can and should discuss your experiences eventually, it's important to keep in mind that tell me about yourself is meant to give your interviewer a sense of who you are as a person and whether you'll be a good fit for their program. Your goal in answering this question should be to humanize yourself and show that there's more to you than being a great medical student, which is why reiterating your stats isn't a particularly effective tactic. Remember that the fact that you've been invited to interview means that your academic stats, extracurriculars, and clinical experiences have already been deemed good enough. And keep in mind that your interviewer has access to and might already be familiar with what you've already submitted in your application. That's why you don't need to worry about making sure that your accomplishments are at the forefront of the conversation. You won't be rejected from a residency just because you didn't mention your amazing test scores or recite every extracurricular you've participated in. Instead, here are the things you should focus on. Conveying who you are, not only as a medical student, but also as a human. Describing the events or situations in your life that have led you to medicine. Making a positive first impression that's personable, polite, and polished. So, how should you approach the tell me about yourself question? A strong response will first describe your personal background before transitioning into how it's led you into medicine. Since this question will most likely come towards the beginning of your interview, you can think of your response as an introduction to yourself. Another way of thinking about it is you're telling the story of how you arrived at where you are today, a medical student and a future physician. You should aim to keep your response relatively short, say around 1 to 2 minutes, while covering multiple aspects of yourself. Let's go over a step-by-step method you can use to craft a great answer. To begin, brainstorm some topics you might want to talk about to open up your response. Common topics include elements of your upbringing, like where you grew up and what your family was like, your educational background, personal interests or hobbies that are important to you, where you live and what your life is currently, such as if you're married or have children, other circumstances that have made a significant impact on your life. Once you've finished brainstorming, reflect on why these topics are key to understanding who you are. For example, maybe you moved to Boston for medical school, but you strongly identify with the easygoing West Coast culture you grew up in. Or perhaps your immigrant grandparents lived with your family and were essential in helping you maintain cultural and linguistic ties to your ethnic background. Or maybe you're a marathon runner, which has helped improve your physical and mental endurance. Next, narrow your list down to 3 to 5 topics that you want to talk about. Then think about how at least one of those topics could act as a pivot that connects to medicine or the residency. For instance, in our sample response that you'll hear in just a minute, the applicant talks about how his interest in darkroom photography led to an interest in radiology. Or, to offer another example, perhaps your spouse grew up in the city where the residency is, and the two of you would be excited to live near family. Once you've found your pivot, you can then touch briefly on your interests and experiences in medicine. Remember that talking about these things isn't the point of this question, so you don't need to go into too much in depth. In fact, if there's a medical topic that you want to make sure to talk about in detail, it'll get more attention if you bring it up later. However, ending your response by noting your excitement about medicine or the residency will go a long way towards setting the stage for a great interview. After you've put it all together, make sure to take the time to practice delivering your response. While you do want to focus on remembering the content you've prepared, you should also make sure that your delivery is conversational and fluid. Nothing will ruin your amazing answer more than seeming robotic instead of natural. Now I'll share a great response to the tell me about yourself interview question. Once I finish reading the response, I'll talk about why it works. I grew up in a Japanese American family in Boulder. As the eldest of 4 kids, I was expected to help around a lot, whether that was staining wood for my mom's frame shop or mixing chemicals for my dad's darkroom. When I was young, I resented it a little, but now that I'm a darkroom photographer myself, I realized that it was actually the beginning of my interest in chemistry, which I took to CU Boulder and then to medical school at UC Davis. I ended up getting very interested in radiology, which can actually feel a lot like a darkroom at times. At Davis, I discovered another hobby that's become important to me, which is cycling. It's been a great way to stay engaged with the outdoors while balancing my stress levels during med school. I'm really excited to be interviewing in Pittsburgh because I know that the hills here will give me a run for my money. Notice that though this interviewee keeps it short and sweet, we could still learn a lot about him, like his cultural background, what his family was like, where he grew up, where he went to school, what his hobbies are, and what led his interest in his specialty. He also subtly drops that he's figured out an effective way to handle stress, and that even as a child, he was taught how to work hard, which are 2 important qualities for doctors. This response works because it paints a vivid picture of who this applicant is beyond medicine, while still conveying why he'd do well at the residency. The open-ended nature of tell me about yourself can make it an intimidating question to answer, but it's actually fairly straightforward. It's a valuable opportunity to give residency committees insight into who you are as a person and why you might be someone who they'd like to have around for the next few years. A great response will act as an introduction to you and your path towards medicine and will pave the way for a successful residency interview. And that's it for this video. If you found it helpful, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new videos. And if you're feeling like you need extra help preparing for your interview, check out the description for more information about our one-to-one interview coaching services. We'd love to help you match with your dream residency program. All right, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.